welcome.
Thank you. That was a very colorful entrance.
Yeah. We like to have a little color, little excitement here.
Yeah.
So welcome to Tokyo.
Thank you, David.
And this is your first time in Japan?
It is, and my apologies for not, being able to speak in Japanese.
It's okay. I've been told my Japanese sucks as well.
Okay.
So it's totally fine. So I guess just a quick intro to the audience. I think everyone knows who you are. But if you could, in your own words, in like 30, 60 seconds, kind of tell everyone some of the work that you did at GigaOm and kind of what that was for the tech industry.
Oh, wow. Just 30 seconds?
It's okay. You can talk for longer. We have 45 minutes.
Okay. My name is Om Malik. I was a technology journalist for about 27 years. I stopped being a full-time journalist in January 2014 to join True Ventures as a full-time venture investor. I started GigaOm in 2001 after the bubble had burst as a place to aggregate the best possible news about technology. Because at that time, all the publications, magazines, everything was going away and very few were left behind. And my idea was that every day, whatever interesting thing happened in tech, I would write about it, mostly because I loved the industry. And at that time, I also felt that the idea of old school publishing was changing to a more new, open blogging model where you have a one-on-one relationship with your readers, which was a big change from all the publications I had worked for. I had worked for Quick Nikkei News in America as a reporter for them. I worked at Forbes, starting the Forbes.com, and I worked at Red Herring and Business 2.0, all tech and tech business publications. But the idea in every publication was that it was just you were writing but never really interacted with the reader.
So, as I recall, like GigaOm, that was so enormously influential in the tech world. Like if you appeared in GigaOm, if you had a good review in GigaOm, that was kind of like a stamp of approval. But before you got there, as you said, 27 years in the industry, what first attracted you to the publishing world?
I think I was fairly young when I knew I wanted to be a reporter. I did not know that I wanted to be a technology reporter. And I think I was still in my teens. And I joined as a teenager. I started working for a teenage magazine. And I ground my way up from there and went to go work.
For a teenage magazine?
Yeah.
What was the topic for the teenage magazine?
It was just an all-purpose magazine. And I used to help collate all the music news from overseas, and it was essentially blogging on paper.
Okay.
You would just pick out the best tidbits from all over the world and just rewrite it and share it with your readers. And that was my first job. And then other was covering college and high school entertainment and sports events, which was also a lot of fun. That was when I was very young, but I always knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the media. I wanted to write. I was drawn to writing a lot. And so from there I went to, started writing about other things like Bollywood movies and fashion and eventually business. And from business, I found my focus on technology.
So it sounds like you approach writing really as like a craft and you're ready to kind of approach anything. But technology sticks out. What makes technology, I guess, stick out for you? Because especially if you're just looking for creativity, the arts have plenty of that. So what is it about the technology beat that made you say, this is what I really want to focus on?
I don't know. I still have not been able to answer that question. It was something inherently which clicked in my mind that this works. I understand this. I think it was like early 1990s when I first encountered CompuServe, and at that time I realized, wow, like you can, I didn't see a service. I saw the CompuServe email, and I said, what if this could be for everybody? And that email idea, and I said the power of communication was so strong. And at that point, I was completely hooked. And I said, okay, I'm going to do more research. And I did more research, ended up learning about the internet. And I knew that, intuitively, I knew that was a big story, and I need to cover it. And somehow, I ended up covering that story.
Yeah, you covered a lot of stories.
Yeah.
So if I remember correctly, you kind of continued your career. You were at, correct me if I'm wrong, you were at Forbes.com before GigaOm. Is that right?
No, it was Business 2.0 before GigaOm.
Okay,
And before that, it was Red Herring.
right.
And before that, it was Forbes.com.
Okay.
I started GigaOm as a side project when I was working for Red Herring.
I see, I see.
And they actually didn't want to do anything with it, so I said, okay.
So, but at that point, what made you think that this was, I guess, a project that was worth doing? Was it just pure passion? Did you see a business side to it? It's a big jump, because up until that point, you had years of being a very successful reporter, and now you're taking on a whole new level of headaches as the founder of a company.
No, there was no company in 2001. It was just a website. It was very clear that the news media as we knew it had to be reinvented. I was writing about technology in publications which came out 2 months after or 3 months after I wrote about something. The world had completely changed in those 3 months. It made absolutely no sense. I mean, I remember writing about a company called Quest, writing a really great piece about that company, and the article comes out, and 2 days later, the CEO is being charged for nefarious activities, and the company is going bankrupt. So I think that was a very big realization that tech industry moves so fast. We need a new way of writing about it, and blogging made the most sense at that time because it was instant. It didn't take any overhead. It cost literally nothing, and it allowed me to find my tribe, people who wanted to interact with me on things of interest. And I think it just kind of all clicked. I didn't go out and set out to start a business or invent a new thing. It just happened. It was a perfect storm of consumer need and my own desire to constantly write about things on a daily basis. I think tech deserves to be written on a daily basis. Otherwise, you don't quite understand the depth and the nuance of tech because things are changing so much faster. And I think that's why I still find there is so much opportunity in technology media and technology media innovation.
So when you started, you talked about finding your tribe, the people who wanted to have this same discussion with you. Was that tribe enough to make the business profitable and successful from the start? Or is that something you had to really build at and find person by person until you reached the liftoff point? Basically, how bad were your first year struggles?
I think the company, from 2001 to 2006, it was just a website. It was me doing whatever I did after my day job was over. Essentially, that was it. I would stay up at night and write about things that made sense, or during lunch hour, that was my job. My job was still writing for Business 2.0, writing all sorts of great things. But the whole idea of writing for a monthly publication and just waiting didn't make any sense. I had to do it. In 2006, I was convinced by many people to actually turn this into a company. And that's when things got a little interesting. The first year was not that complicated. There was a lot of challenges like what you face as a new startup. I think Dave McClure spoke. He was my acting operations guy for a few days. He was for a few months. He ran the website redesign project and other things, and helped me figure out a lot of things. There was a lot of people who wanted me to turn that into a company, and there was a lot of people like Dave who helped. And one of the true partners is a guy called Tony Schneider, who was constantly in my ear and said, "Hey, you have to start this company, you cannot just keep writing this on the site because you're missing an opportunity. And I always felt, well, I'm just writing, so this is my opportunity. But he felt it was a company. And that was in June 2006 is when GigaOm was formed as a corporate entity. The first 12 months were like complete chaos. I have no idea what happened. Like they just went by so fast.
How many people were with you at that time? Was it like, I don't know, mostly reporters? Did you have salespeople?
So there were 3 people at that time. Like on day 1, it was me and Katie Fehrenbacher, and then day 15, it was Liz Gaines who joined us. And then maybe 2 months later, we had our first business person join us. So it was like literally 6 people for first 1 year.
Was that first year, because like everyone's saying you got to do the company, and you start to get excited. Was that first year, did that make you think, why are these people all telling me they're a company? This is crazy.
I don't remember any of it. Like I seriously, I think you move so fast, and when you're in a startup, you don't quite understand like what is happening. So I think it's really. I'll tell you one of the great things about this. I would do this, that first 1 year. The fact that I don't remember anything, I would still do it. Like I remember the chaos. I remember not sleeping. I remember working from my living room and the Starbucks and essentially being very nimble and having arguments with Dave about design, and we always I just had fun. Like I think that was the most fun I had during the whole company creation process.
When you started out, obviously you have a very distinct writing style. How did you train other people to write like you? Did you let them have their own voice? What's your approach to crafting good tech writers?
Wow, there is no good approach to crafting good tech writers. They're either good writers or they're not. I think after that, do they understand technology or not? I think there's very few people who are an overlap like that. I think Katie and I knew each other for a very long time, and so I knew how she thought, and her thinking was very much along the lines of how I used to look at the world. I didn't care if she wrote differently, but her ideology and how she looked at the world was very similar to mine, and same was with Liz. And then eventually we figured out we need a style and everything, and so it was all an evolutionary process. But the number one thing is you said a tech writer, first they should know how to write. And I'm not saying they have to write long Hemingway-like prose, but they need to write in simple, clear, concise English, which everybody can understand. I'm talking purely about America. I don't quite know how things work here. But in the US, that would be my number one thing, is look for a very clean, simple writer who understands that not every reader will catch the nuances. And then the other criteria is good understanding of technology. And the third main criteria is how to tell that, take their learning and tell and share it with, I call it the mom test. Will my mom understand it?
Oh, yeah.
And if you can't write something that simply, you're probably doing a bad job.
I see. So over the years, you've seen so many tech companies rise, fall, stay the same. What's a company that has always been kind of one that you love writing about?
I still love writing about Skype. I think it was one of the greatest companies which never really fully realized its potential, and people didn't quite understand how disruptive it was. Mm-hmm. They were the people who invented the idea of network effects.
Yeah.
Right. Like people give credit to some other folks in the industry for hacking the whole network effects idea, and that's not true. Those guys figured out how to do it right, and that's a company which was endlessly fascinating. I still feel like writing about it because Microsoft has completely, gotten rid of the old Skype, and there's some new weird dinosaur hybrid exists, which is, I don't quite understand it. But that company is still has a special place in my heart. I don't know if many people remember Sun Microsystems. This is one of the greatest companies of Silicon Valley, which no longer exists. That was another company I loved writing about. I still think about it all the time because it was such a great, great company.
But what to you made it so great?
You know, there were a lot of interesting characters. Vinod Khosla worked there, Bill Joy worked there, Scott McNeely worked there, Ed Zander worked there. These guys were like, you know, they were like mavericks. And so they were great characters, but the company invented so many things. They invented Java, they invented the idea of a, you know, like workstation, they invented servers, they invented, you know, the big machines, which are all commonplace. They invented so much technology. They invented the idea of a network computer and, you know, like, you know, most people use security cards you know, and they invented a lot of those technologies. Just, you know, but they were also a company which had so much hubris and they were so stuck in their ways. In a way, they represent the classic Silicon Valley cycle, great smart people coming together, building great things, and eventually technology passing them by and them not being able to overcome their own limitations. That was a great company to write about. And I had great sources inside it, so which is always fun.
It sounds like you know a lot of people there, yes.
None of the 4 people that I mentioned ever talked to me. They still don't talk to me.
Oh, okay.
In my books, that's a good sign of a good reporter is when the CEO hates you.
So, gosh, you said so many things in there that I want to follow up on. It's hard to pick the right spot. So
Take a few minutes. It's
take
okay.
a few minutes? Okay. I'm really nervous. No, so when you're talking about the right, I lost it again. You're talking about like the right sort of tech reporter. You said writing matters first. And I feel like nowadays there's kind of a negative sentiment towards tech reporting or tech blogging, that it's kind of not real reporting or that it's very incestuous with the people involved. Like you just said, in your case, you maybe knew some of these folks, but there was like kind of a line. And do you think that that is a valid criticism, that overall the state of tech journalism is kind of falling, or do you think that that's maybe invalid?
I think I'll rephrase your question. So, number one, the number one thing at GigaOm and all my career was I always had one master to serve. That was the reader. Okay? I didn't give a shit if the people didn't invite me to their parties. I'm already an outsider in Silicon Valley, in America, right? Even in the educated circles. I wasn't supposed to be in the place I was. So I didn't really care about whether the people wanted to hang out with me or not, or would they invite me to their cool parties or not. What I cared about, will my readers invite me into their life? That was the only thing that mattered to me. That was the number one criteria for a person to be hired as a reporter at GigaOm. So that is the single most important thing a reporter needs to do. Unfortunately, that sometimes gets forgotten when we have a hype cycle which is at an extreme high. People forget that they're not serving the interests of the people they're writing about, but it is the people who are reading them. They are the actual ultimate masters. This is a very subtle difference. Every single upcycle, you see this happen, and every single cycle ends and things come back to normal. There's nothing new about that. Now, you talk about today, I think when the cycle starts to hit a peak, people start writing about the spectacle of technology. They don't write about the actual technology, the actual business, the digging deeper into what are the actual business dynamics of a story becomes harder and harder and harder. You know, I read this story today on BuzzFeed about, social decay. Interesting idea that you can use Twitter to tell which apps are going to die. or which apps are going to fail in
Like
next
by
few
mentions
months.
and
That's an
hashtags and
interesting
things.
idea,
Yeah.
very solid, logical, way of thinking about a story. But it didn't get to its full conclusion, right?
What did you think the
It
conclusion
was
was?
sensationalized to a point that it got my attention, but then it felt like eating like fast food, that you're hungry after 2 hours. It's like, wait, you got me here. I read the story. So what's the conclusion? How are you making this assertion, but you still have no logical conclusion for me? And I think that's what I mean is like not digging into the dynamic of the whole business aspect of it. Like, why are these companies failing? The correlation you found the cause, but not like, okay, what's going on, right?
Right, I see, I see. So it's interesting you bring up BuzzFeed, and I think the analogy is perhaps apt. So you eat the fast food, and if you're me, you keep eating the fast food, whether it's BuzzFeed or McDonald's. And so they still manage to attract a lot of people and are becoming very influential in the media world. Do you think that it's overall a positive thing for media because they're using some of their earnings to do more hardcore reporting, or do you think that ultimately BuzzFeed is big now but will be quickly forgotten in a few years?
So those are two different things. I'm a huge BuzzFeed fan. Don't get me wrong. I think if of all the new companies, they are the one I think have the best shot of building a big business. Okay, so that said, I can tell you if they went away today, I wouldn't even drop one tear. I wouldn't shed a single tear if BuzzFeed didn't exist. I don't think there is a lot of people who would disagree with me on that. Like, there's a lot of people who like what they have to offer, but they won't miss it. Whereas something like New York Times, people would miss. People would be upset if it went away. So that said, BuzzFeed is using all sorts of science, all sorts of data, using all sorts of tricks to get people to come back and build a massive audience, which is why they should be applauded, right? So they have cracked the audience, equation. Now they have to figure out how to turn that into like a big money machine. And I think if there is one group which can figure out, that's them. So they're definitely my favorite new media company.
So in terms of like this kind of new media landscape, there's BuzzFeed, there's Vice. How do you see them as interacting with each other? Do you think that this is just kind of like the new, if we flash forward in 20 years, are we going to be talking about, say, BuzzFeed and Vice the way we talk about New York Times, Wall Street Journal? Like, well, of course, like these are giant names, everyone knows them. Or do you think that, or even throw Vox into the mix as well, like how do you think that it's going to play out over 20 years? Do you think they really can take this cracked audience, as you said, and turn that into like a undeniably mainstream voice of authority?
It's literally hard to say what is the voice of authority right now. I don't think the hyperactive world we live in today makes it very difficult for one entity to be an authority on anything. So of all the names you mentioned, I think BuzzFeed, like I said, has the highest chance of being around for a long period of time if they can build a good, revenue model. And I don't have any doubts that the team there is pretty world-class and they will be able to do it. The Vice, on the other hand, is the extreme opposite. If BuzzFeed is all data and science, but Vice is all art. Like, I mean, there is not a single show they make which is not interesting. Like, just interesting to different sets of, people. That company is more. It reminds me more of, like, they're like HBO meets CNN meets National Geographic meets ESPN. I think that's a scary company. I can tell you that company is going to be around for a very, very long time because they're making things which are interesting to a large number of people across many different, demographic sets. It's a really interesting company. I'm not a big fan of anything else which is out there in the middle, like Mike and Upworthy and all. They're great, but who knows? I don't see any special value there. At least BuzzFeed has their science working for them. and Vice has their art working for them.
So in terms of science and art, those are both things that GigaOm had. And to go on to the science side, at the time that you were kind of building company from '06 until this year, what were some of the, I guess, what were some of like the data-driven techniques that you used to try and attract users? And kind of how did that change over time, or if it did?
So candidly, we had a lot of great ideas. We were not very good at executing them because we were the guys who were doing it first. So there were no role models. We had to figure it out all the time. And we would, like most of the times, we would be making wrong decisions because we had no roadmap. I think from our standpoint, when we were trying to scale up, the social web itself had not scaled up. So even though we had the whole notion around how to use social to grow, the guys who came a year or two later, like Mashable and then BuzzFeed, HuffPo and BuzzFeed, they just did it better and they just got scale better. More importantly, the whole idea of using social to scale and the kind of content we created was very different. We were creating, we were taking a more artisanal approach to creating things which added value to our readers, and it took a little bit longer to create that stuff. And so we were a little bit, not in sync from even though we had the ideas, even though we were trying to develop the tech and go forward, we just were like trying to figure out too many things. And I think that was a challenge. I mean, the challenge manifested itself in 2015, so.
Yeah, when that happened, because you had already stepped away to join True, if I recall correctly, and for that, I guess, endgame, if I can ask, what were some of the things that maybe you were hoping to execute or try to make to turn things around?
At the company after?
Yeah, the company.
Yeah, well, I think I had left, and let's just say that we tried to do some damage control, and it was really, really hard. It's a little late. And we had gone down a certain path, and that path was very expensive, and it caused more problems than we realized.
So right now, there's a little bit of like a media boom, because you have some of the companies we mentioned before, and they're very visible, and so you have other people getting into the mix. In terms of building a media company, is that even something that you would recommend to an entrepreneur?
Well, if you're crazy enough to be an entrepreneur, you should be crazy enough to pick any category to go after, right? I think we were backstage, I was talking to Dave about one of his investments, which is Twilio, who I met in 2008, and he was starting a VoIP company when all VoIP companies were failing at that time. So talk about being crazy. And if you're an entrepreneur, you have crazy ideas, you do things. My friend Matt Mullenweg started WordPress after there had been an established blogging platform called Movable Type, and there was Blogger, which Google had bought. So it's like, if you're an entrepreneur, you don't give a shit about what the opportunities are. You just have an itch you have to scratch. So if you're a media guy and you think you have an edge and you have a smart way of thinking about it, you should go for it. Now, here is the reality of the world today is there's only two kinds of companies you can build in media. One, which is pure hyperscale, which is BuzzFeed or Vice. Or you build a smaller, niche, limited, scope company like Skift, right? Or like Business of Fashion. You can succeed with those niche products very well, and you can succeed with hyperscale products very well. I think there is more opportunity in the niches than there is at the hyperscale level, because hyperscale becomes the game of being ability to come up with an idea, come up with the science, come up with the tech, build a team, grow really, really, really fast, and in order to do that, raise tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. So you have to be a very special kind of person, like Jonah Peretti is, right? Or Shane Smith is. So there is that barrier to entry when you go hyperscale. But when you're niche and you're focused, you can actually build a really solid business. Like I think both Skift and Business of Fashion are two perfect examples of things which will succeed. Like there is another company called Mattermark, which is focused on collecting information and data around startups and venture activity and private investments. I mean, that's another great business, which is going to be very, very profitable. And I think, so people need to look for niches if you're in the media, unless like, you're in this market and you're somebody very, very special and you can raise, $50 million on day one, then you can go build a scale business really fast.
Is it a good idea to raise money like that, though? So, like, for media companies, you always have this thing, like, where's the independence from? And, like, TechCrunch, ourselves as well, everyone has a disclosure, like, a mile long about all the different potential investors that they've had or a company that they're involved in. How do you feel about media companies taking VC money?
I mean, they used to take money from other people, like rich billionaires, right? I mean, now at least it's more professionally organized money, right? I think very different. Like Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, right? And Carlos Slim owned a portion of New York Times for a while. So, I mean, how is that any different? Like it just is money. Somebody else owns a piece of your operation, disclosure or not.
Mm-hmm.
The professional investors at least are looking for a financial return. And the best way a financial return will come if a product has clean reputation, right? Simple as that. And if you have good reputation, readers reward you with attention. Attention can then be translated into dollars through advertising or events or whatever you want to do. So I think it's fine. I'm not against the idea of venture capital in media, but only at the hyperscale level, right? Like if you're building a small operation, then you should not try and spend too much time trying to raise, money which you can essentially return.
Media is such a big part of what you do. Do you ever think about dipping your toes back in and
No.
trying? No, very fast.
Right. Just
Once was enough.
I am done with dealing with the advertising-based media models.
You're
I
done-
would let other people grow old doing that.
Okay. So now that you're at True, what are you their like exclusive media guy? Are you looking at other investments as well?
I look at mostly companies which have real tech and companies which use data and they have proprietary data sources, they have proprietary technology, and they have a way to extract value from both those things to build their services. I think that's the way I look at the world. So most of the companies at least I'm involved in, they fall into that spectrum. From, one of our companies is a company called Twin Prime, which is essentially is in the business of making apps perform better, smarter, more intelligently. It's like because of the poor network conditions, it ensures companies to have, like apps to have a good user experience. So again, not something you see on it's not on your screen, but it's the thing which will be behind the screen. So I kind of look for those kind of companies which are deep tech.
So in terms of deep tech, how much of the market do you think is actually made up of deep tech? Because going back to the idea of what we see in the news, most of what we see is not like that. It's things that are like a bit catchier, a bit more popular for everyone else.
I think what you read in the news doesn't mean that's the only thing which is happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think unfortunately, this is the sad part of GigaOm going away, is that a lot of those companies which were doing real tech and tech-related stuff are getting, they tend to get less attention now, because we were one place which focused on stuff like that. Because I've always felt that if you have people building real tech, you will have like interesting, the Silicon Valley will keep Silicon Valley not as a place, but as an entity, or like a philosophical notion will retain value. I think people look at Uber and they only see like a car service, whereas I see like a massive real-time, data intelligence system and a logistics system which is of like such hyperscale. It's never been built before. That's a pure deep tech company with a very simple, user interface. So that's how we looked at the world back then, and I've looked at the world back from all my life like that, and so I still continue to do that. And you'll have Ben Horowitz tomorrow, and you can ask him this question. I mean, like many other VCs, they're investing in a ton of good, solid, old-fashioned technology companies. There is a lot of activity going on, and this, I believe, right now is still the most exciting time to be in tech, because we're reinventing a whole different stack. We are reinventing, how people use technology, things people use technology. I mean, for what technology is being used, everything is being reinvented. So there's a lot of little things which we will see, come to market.
What's a reinvention that's happened recently which you were particularly excited about?
It's something which not many people notice, but the chip level encryption on the iPhone is something I was very excited about. The new processors they're building for the next generation phones, I'm excited about those. I think some of the stuff Google is doing around Google Car, like not the car itself, but all the sensor technologies they're doing, I'm excited about. We have a portfolio company called Venium, which is essentially doing, constantly moving mesh networks in highly dense urban environments and doing, sub-millisecond handoffs and amongst thousands and millions of, endpoints. I'm excited about that because that profoundly changes how you and I actually use the phone and all the devices around us. So, there's a bunch of companies. Like, I think, I would say of all, Apple and Google seem to be doing a lot of interesting stuff.
Okay. So you still, I just want to touch back on the media point one more time. So you still blog yourself.
I do.
And you still blog about technology sometimes.
Yeah.
For the technology you blog about, is that always going to be kind of different from the technology that you maybe invest in? Is that more of like a casual thing on the blog? How do you separate it yourself, or do you see it all as part and parcel of kind of what it is that you do?
No, I think now I have a personal blog. I write about anything and everything. I probably tonight I'm going to write about a bar I went to last night, right?
It was a good bar?
It was a great bar. It was like this bar a friend of mine took us to, just like a guy with 10,000 records and lots of whiskey, and you can just hang out and listen to music, jazz music.
Please give me the name of this bar. This sounds fantastic.
And if I could, it's called JBS, Jazz, Blues, and Soul.
Okay.
Yeah, and but I would probably blog about that. But I'll also blog about all the technologies I saw in my 4-city trip I took recently. Right, I will write about all the like any portfolio companies we've invested in, and I'm involved with. I'll write about them, not telling like we invested in them, but giving the reasons why I'm excited about them. So it's all over the map. It's not like it's not a business. It's just a personal space where I can talk about things that interest me. I professionally occasionally write a column or two for the NewYorker.com and hopefully for Bloomberg View in the near future.
I see. So we have to wrap up soon, but I wanted to go back to a point you raised earlier about people maybe writing or getting excited about the spectacle of tech and not the hard tech itself. And if you were to give an advice to like a young entrepreneur or a young investor about how not to get wrapped up in the spectacle, what would that be?
I don't know if I can give anyone any advice around that, mostly because people are going to do what's convenient for them and what's easy for them. But one needs to remember that tech is all about like actually tech, not just the headlines, not the noise. It's about tech and solving a real problem, whether you're solving a problem for a business user or solving a problem for end customer, end consumer, right? You look at Slack. The Slack is why it's growing so fast, which is another one of my singular angel investment is Slack and is the reason it is growing so fast is solving the fundamental problem that teams need to communicate with each other, not on email and in real time, and not everybody's in the same room all at the same time or in the same time zone at the same time. It's a very simple product, executed very simply, and from that standpoint, that's what is the essence of Silicon Valley. We need to solve a problem. You can't just, you can get all hyped up, but if it's not solving a problem, that's not really a company worth writing about or investing in or worth starting.
But most of the hype in the media around Silicon Valley doesn't pay attention to this, right? So do you think that there will be like a clearing out of people who are focusing on the spectacle if there is another downturn?
It always happens. It's happened in last 3 downturns I've seen up close and personal. It's like the noise level just goes down because you just have to focus on all the good stuff. And there is so much good stuff right now. Like just on consumers level, you look at the impact of Uber and Airbnb, and they were born right in the middle of the last downturn in 2008, right? And since then, there's been very few companies which have had scale like that. There's a reason for that, because they essentially solved a fundamental problem society was facing.
But do you think that it's easier to spot those problems during the downturn? I was asking an investor friend of mine, and I said, when do unicorns come out? And he said, a lot of times some of the best companies come out when there's the fewest resources. Do you agree with that?
Dude, unicorns is just such a ironic term, in my opinion. I can't believe people are still using that. It's like unicorn is a
myth. Let me use a different word. Let me sound cooler.
All right. No, unicorn is a mythical thing which doesn't exist. It's a big fat lie. So if you're calling yourself a unicorn, as a company, you're a big fat lie. Right?
Techinasia is not a unicorn.
Why don't you just say what you are? You just a startup with, some valuation. If valuation makes your company, then you got issues. I'm sorry, I get really, teed off about that thing.
All right. I like it. I like learning about what not to call companies.
It's like unicorn. I heard of unicorn. It's like it's not a unicorn.
I'm so happy you didn't see my talk earlier today.
Sorry. It's all Dave's fault.
No, but I take your point. So one thing, I just want to kind of gaze into a crystal ball with you. You, as you said, you've seen the last 3 downturns. When you are entering a downturn, are the signs the same, or is each one different? Because this is something I think a lot of people in this room, we only know, especially in Japan, the Japanese tech scene right now, most people only know this current kind of good period. And we don't really know what it's like to go into a down period. Does it happen so suddenly? Are there signs for it?
Okay, let me explain to you why you should not focus on the whole downturn and the bubble and stuff, and focus on the long term. So when the steam engine was invented, for about 40 to 50 years, it was very static. It didn't go anywhere. It did functions which were like pump out, water from mines and stuff like that, run the looms in some places. It was a very functional device in many ways. Then somebody had a bright idea. Well, what if we put the steam engine on wheels and see what happens? Well, the massive scale industrialization happened. The society changed, behaviors changed, food habits changed, even war changed, right? Now, we have had the same thing happen to us. We had the steam engine, which was the microprocessor, which was always very static. It was in one place, right? And since then, we've added mobility to it. We've added wireless connections to it. So the computer which used to sit in the house or in the office now sits in our pocket, on our wrist, and in our car, and it's pretty much everywhere. So the shift is exactly the same. You're starting to see behaviors change. People see Uber and they see, oh, it's like a taxi. No, it's not like a taxi. It's like a company which is about calling up a car service when you need it. It's changing behavior. It's changing our relationship with cars and transportation. You look at a company like Munchery, it's changing the idea of a restaurant, right? I think you have to start thinking about the world from that, just like the industrialization when it happened in the 1700s, changed the society for next 250 years. We are entered that same phase. Just like back, we had the railway bubble and we had all sorts of bubbles and whatnot. But the cycle was continuous, right? And that's what I'm saying is that this is going to be a long shift, right? It's not going to be 2 years or 3 years. Valuations may come and go down. If you're building things of value, they will exist for a long time. I think that's what people need to focus on. I think all this talk about unicorns and valuations and bubble, it distracts from the fact that we are going through a massive, massive tech transition. And that transition is just getting started. The old companies haven't even died yet, right? People like, Avis buy Zipcar to prevent the, stuff to happen to them, but we don't know. They didn't prevent, Uber was not, invented way after, the Zipcar happened. So I think things are in flux and they're changing and changing very profoundly. I think that's the core message, whether it's in Japan, whether it's in America, whether it's in India. You look at the scale with which things grow now, think that there is a huge amount of change happening. Focus on that. Focus on building things which people want. People, whether they entertain people, whether they solve a problem, they make some service easier. Those are the things which will last. I don't think there's no upside in spending your energy on trying to focus on valuations and all this bubble talk. That just is like spectacle of technology. It's a way to fill a lot of blog pages. It's like cable TV, cable talk shows, except way worse.
Well, I think that's the perfect last word. I'm getting flashed that we're out of time, but I want to say thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. Thank you for having me.